Hey, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey, bestie, this world's a better place because you're in it. See what happens when you subscribe. You get a bonus greeting on every episode. On this episode, we talked to Dan Montenaro. We spent the whole hour really talking about accountability and how to have tough conversations and how doing so and making a habit of that can lead to embedding compliance and embedding a true culture of integrity and connectedness throughout the organization that ends up leading to that excellence that we're all striving toward. So hope you enjoyed as much as I did.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
I'm glad to get you on the Ethics Experts. I've been excited to have you on as a guest. I always like to kind of start with, like, what were you like as a kid? What kind of a kid were you? There's always a connection between the kind of kid you were and the kind of compliance and ethics professional you are today.
So I was, I was an athlete. I mean, that's all I did. All I did was play sports. I played soccer, basketball, baseball, tennis, golf. I was always outside. We lived in this sort of idyllic neighborhood on the west side of Cleveland where everybody knew everybody and everybody rode their bikes around. I think now about what we used to do, where we used to go, and our parents had no idea where we were compared to, like, what goes on today. And so I was always outside, always running around. I was a pretty good student just because it was demanded of me to be a good student, but I always liked playing sports and then eventually settled on tennis, which I played pretty intensely and competitively in high school and a little bit in college. But after that, it was basically had a ball in my hand or I had a pen in my hand. I mean, that was about it. I wasn't a big TV guy. I wasn't a big, I didn't have a lot of other hobbies, but basically it was just school and sports. And that's sort of how I grew up.
You said it was demanded of you. What was that like?
Just expected. My parents both grew up, I would say, relatively on the lower end of the middle class, I think. And they had opportunities for us to go to private school, Catholic high school, and, they stretched pretty good to get us there. So the expectations of us were always that, we did well in school and excelled in that area. And so it didn't dawn on me at the time that, the better you do in high school, the better you'll do in college, the better you'll do in grad school. Just, learning those skills and having those be repeatable. So it helped. But yeah, it was definitely expected.
Do you remember when that clicked for you? Because there was a point in my life where I felt like I was like trying to get good grades for my parents. And then there was another point where I was like, wait, this is actually for me. Like, if I do well, then that's going to kind of put me on a different trajectory in my life. And that sort of like the fuel changed a little bit or something.
I remember exactly when it was junior year of high school. I was elected president of our National Honor Society. And I had no idea what that meant or what that was. And that came with all sorts of opportunities to do things in the city, in Cleveland. And then we had an opportunity to go to DC. I can't remember if it was for National Honor Society or Model UN, something like that. But, I was on a tour bus to DC with probably the smartest kids all over Cleveland. Going down to Georgetown for a few days to, do Model UN. And I got down there with a bunch of kids from Boston and Philly and New York and Atlanta, kids from Europe and Africa. And I was sort of had this moment of like, I can get out of Cleveland now. I love Cleveland. I still root for every sports team Cleveland has, down to the point where my kids are going to have me committed. But
you're nothing if not loyal,
especially with the Browns. Yeah, my daughter will come in when I'm watching the Browns, and she'll just like, Dad, why are you doing this to yourself? The Rams are, down the street. They're good. No, it just got me thinking that, there was more out there.
Yeah.
And I was one of the few. So I graduated from a pretty well respected Catholic high school in Cleveland, and I was one of maybe 5 or 6 of 175 kids that left the state of Ohio.
Wow.
And the rest of the other 4 were, I think, either wrestlers or hockey players who, either got drafted or went and played in college. And, I was able to go to DePaul. I had a scholarship, an academic scholarship. And then once I got to Chicago, I was like, okay, now I get it. It's advancing. And then not so much the advancing, it's the opportunity to do something else. And then I translated that to my kids because I have one who's, both, I think at times, struggled with academics. And my point to them was not about the academics. My point to them was just about the opportunity.
Right.
And just to say, this will give you opportunities to do other things. You don't have to do other things. You don't have to go to college. You don't have to be a lawyer like your old man, but those success in that, somewhat objective area will give you a chance to, get opportunities to do things that, you might not otherwise know you had a chance to do.
Yeah. It's a means to an end in some way, it opens doors and gives you a lot more optionality, and it gives you a lot more chance to pursue different paths versus getting like relegated to one thing, or doors closed,
right,
in your face before you even reach for the handle.
Yeah. Like I have a daughter who loves to learn, but hates school.
Yeah.
And she has already told us that my wife and I will be living in her pool house when we're older.
Okay, cool.
So she's got it all figured out.
Good.
But her point is like, I just want to work. Her point is she just wants to work and create things, create a company or create experiences or just excel at one thing. And why do I need to learn biology or chemistry to do that? And my point to her is just take as much as you can out of it and get, cross that barrier and get that opportunity to do something else. Because if someone knows you can bust your butt on a chemistry grade, they might give you the keys to their company one day, have you manage one of their facilities or something like that. So, if you can show that you can put your nose down and do something, especially if you don't want to do it, that'll give you the opportunity, and then you can do things you want to do later.
Right. So you find yourself at DePaul. I used to live right by DePaul there in Chicago.
In Lincoln Park.
Yeah, exactly.
Great neighborhood.
Great neighborhood, great area. So much going on in the city, right in that area. It's really a great school. So how did you get from there into compliance?
So I knew going into college that I was going to law school. That was the plan.
Do you remember what attracted you to that path? Because you probably had a lot of options, right? I mean, you had a, academic scholarship. You could have gone in a bunch of different directions.
Yeah. I sort of there were 2 things. So one was sort of academic. So when I got to honors calculus in high school, I knew that was it for me. When it came to numbers, it just, I think I think I may have eked out a B in honors calculus my senior year of high school, and I consider that still to be my single greatest achievement in life. Thankfully, the goalie on our hockey team, who is now a board certified physician in the state of Ohio, was really patient and a great friend of mine and got me through honors calculus. But I knew at that point I was a better writer than I was with numbers. I was a better speaker than I was in a lab. And so I knew that was going to be the path. I had thought about it much earlier. When I was little, I was like 12. Me and 4 of our friends were hit by a drunk driver. And the court case lasted 3 or 4 years. There was all sorts of insurance claims going back and forth. We got hit by an uninsured, inebriated driver who had been in 4 accidents that night before. They were looking for him. They were chasing him, not chasing him so much as they were looking for him. He had been in a couple of fender benders, hit a telephone pole. His last accident was hitting a car full of kids on their way to Chuck E. Cheese.
Jeez.
With our report cards in hand. Back then, I don't know if you were, you get it so many
big
tokens
Chuck E.
for
Cheese
an
guy.
A.
Yes.
Yeah. And so we were on our way. And then when the case unfolded, there were always papers in our house, and there were depositions, and there were settlement agreements and all this other stuff. And I basically just sat down one day. I was home from school sick. I was bored out of my mind. And I just sat down and opened everything, and I just read everything chronologically. And it took the real world. I still remember vividly the accident. But injuries were so bad. All of us were really lucky to make it through. But then that boiled down to some guy in our neighborhood was an attorney and helped my parents navigate all that, and got them a settlement, which probably allowed them to pay for a couple years of college. But it just got me thinking, like, I can do this. I can write like this. I can argue like this. I can, I always like wearing a suit. And then on top of that, you start to look at friends of yours, their parents, what do they do? And it just seemed like the people in my neighborhood who were either lawyers, accountants, physicians, for whatever reason, they had nicer cars. They seemed a little bit more engaged with the community. They were always out. People came over to their house for advice, things like that. And I just thought, like, this is going to be the path. And then when I got to DePaul, started studying political science, and I got really deep into the law. I took a lot of classes about the Supreme Court and about regulation, and that just, this is what I want to do. This is the path I'll be on.
Yeah, you knew that was your home.
For sure.
So you get to law school, and there, I talk about this a lot with people who went to law school, but there's so many paths out of law school. You can go so many different ways, once you have that degree. Where did you go, and what kind of paths were you like, those paths are not for me? And, what was it about the path you ended up taking that really resonated with you?
So I went to Cleveland State, and back then, you didn't get hired in-house out of school. And that wasn't, I didn't even know what in-house was. Everything was revolved around law firms.
Right.
The summer internship program, the summer clerk, the firms would come on campus and interview. Cleveland had 2 law schools. So it was us and Case. And, the white shoe, blue chip law firms, whatever you want to say, tended to focus on Case because those students had a better academic history than we did, on par, which is fine. But our school had a lot of judges and had a lot of attorneys that had started their own firm 40 years ago because they could go to our school at night. So there were a lot of mid-sized firms, Cleveland, Columbus, but that was it. It was like, the idea was you finish school, you pass the bar, you got a job at a firm. And I wanted to be a litigator like everybody else, probably a kid, probably due to watching too many LA Law episodes in high school, but I wanted to be a litigator. So I started at a litigation firm. It was actually a tax and litigation firm in Cleveland. McCarthy Levitt was my first job. After that, I went to a small boutique firm because I wasn't getting into court nearly as quickly as I wanted to. So I went to a smaller shop across the street that was really well connected and did a lot of real estate, professional liability type work. And I really liked that. And then I got deathly ill. So I have Crohn's disease, and in my 20s, I went from 175 pounds to 125 pounds in about 4 months.
Oh my gosh.
They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. This is way before,
Yeah,
all the
all the
drugs that
advancements and
thankfully,
all
yeah,
that.
it's funny though. I see the drugs on TV and I was like, I took that trial. I took that trial. But I was lucky enough, and I still say this, I was lucky enough to live in a town that had the Cleveland Clinic, and some really great doctors figured out what was wrong, got me better. But at the time, I knew I couldn't go to court. I couldn't do that. My body just was breaking down.
Yeah.
And so I got an opportunity to go in house at National City Bank, which in Cleveland is like, the flagship
Totally.
company, oldest bank in Ohio. And we had sued them for breach of fiduciary duty on some investment accounts for a client of ours, I think. And after the case was over, the litigator called me and said, in so many words, he used some colorful language, but we need a guy like you to come in here and kick some tail. And we just need a more aggressive litigator in our shop. And would you be interested? And at the time I was engaged, really ill, but I could work 40 hours a week. I could go into the office. I could read contracts. I could direct outside counsel. I could take a deposition on my own if I needed to. But mostly it was consumer credit litigation and consumer credit compliance. The bank was growing. We had a lot of collection activity. The FDCPA claims were starting to ramp up. Plaintiffs' attorneys were starting to realize that there was money to be had in suing banks and financial services companies for lender liability, for aggressive collection techniques, things like that. So there was a lot to do.
Yeah.
And when I got in house, I realized that I left on Friday at 5 and came back Monday at 9. And the best of all was I worked for a bank, so that sometimes got short.
Yeah. You got built-in banker hours. Yeah.
All of a sudden, I was golfing on Columbus Day, and I wasn't at work. And I was like, this will work for me. And I got better. That was the first thing. I got better. I slept more. No one batted an eye when I left to go see 6 doctors over the course of 2 days. It was just like, yeah, sure, you've got 21 vacation days. And I was like, a year? And so it was just this slow and steady. You keep doing your work. You keep taking on more responsibility. You keep getting more efficient. We're going to give you more to do. You're going to make more money. And that was perfect for me at the time. And then so that's how it started. I got in-house and I said to myself, this is what I want to do. And then it went from there.
So what was it about compliance that you've kind of found your home in? What is it about this function that really resonates with you? You're a sports guy, obviously like an aggressive litigator. I remember in our pre-show call, we talked a lot about kind of accountability and this sort of accountability gap and things like that. And, I love hearing people's story because you can kind of get to know, the type of person somebody is, and you can see these sort of threads kind of, be carried through their entire career and how they build a program and how they, reinforce these cultures of integrity that we're all, trying to build. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So it was the chance to work. So this sounds a little odd, but it was a chance to work with people who weren't lawyers. So our compliance efforts were at the bank. I was dealing mostly with the business teams. So you were now part, and this is where it really flipped for me, was you were now part of a team that was running the business or running a line of business or running a department. You were part of a team that was running that. And yes, they needed to have proper documentation. And yes, they needed to collect the money that was owed to the bank. But in order to keep doing that every day and keep doing that efficiently, they had to do it in a compliant and ethical and legal manner. And so it was weaving into the business, the commercial side of the operation, not just the legal department. It was weaving into the business day to day, what they were doing and steering them to get to that point. So when I was at HSBC, when I was in the mortgage group, one day a week, each one of us had to go to the operations center and sit in this little office in the middle of the operations center. And the operators would just come knock on your door. We've got a problem with a loan. We repoed a motorcycle. This is going on. That's going on. Their lawyer's saying X. What do we say in return? And what you were doing was you were training the business people to think holistically that, yes, we did loan the money, and yes, he did default, and yes, he's driving around in a $60,000 Harley that I would like to get my hands back on. But in order to get your hands back on it, the letters had to be right. The timing had to be correct. You had to give him proper period, all that stuff. And just making that whole circle of getting those operators to understand that if you operate efficiently and within compliance and within the guardrails that we're giving you, then that whole circle runs a lot seamlessly, rather than if you just start cutting corners and hoping there won't be a problem. 6-7 times out of 10, there probably won't be. But the 2 or 3 times that there are, it's going to undo all that work, and you're just going to be back in here trying to fix it. So, compliance for me was always about getting the business team to do it right the first time and create processes that were repeatable. And now everybody wants it to be automated, but creating these repeatable processes so that they dotted their I's and crossed their T's on day one, and then they didn't have to worry about that, down the road.
We were talking a little bit about this, like, it's only wrong if you don't get caught type of mentality. And I think a lot of us fight against that, whether we're on a small team or we're, trying to, as you said, sort of integrate and sort of work with these other departments, these other business units in our company. I don't know. I think people are kind of complex. Everybody's kind of two things, I think people cut those corners even though they know they shouldn't, and people take shortcuts, and everyone, water kind of finds a way, right? Well, water kind of takes that path of least resistance. People do as well. Why do you think that mindset still persists right now?
I think it's cultural, and I think it's laziness. I've seen it more as my experience has grown, not just in the United States, but especially the last 2 companies I've been with, who have both had a global presence. I think there's cultural reasons for it. You could have resources in a country that has been. It's funny to think about our country versus other countries as far as history of just stability.
Right.
Governments have been overthrown in countries we operate in repeatedly. We operate in the Philippines. A lot of BPOs operate in the Philippines. The culture is different. The culture is different in India. The culture is different in Guatemala, in Uruguay, in Egypt. And not to say that, the United States isn't always the gold standard, but I think when you have different cultural upbringings, there's less opportunity for people, and they see compliance as maybe just the teacher giving you the rules that you don't you can get away with and not follow.
Right.
And if you don't get caught and there's no punishment, then you've survived that day or you've survived that week. And there's maybe less of a feeling that something is wrong. I think primarily, though, it's laziness. It's just not wanting to do everything that's in front of you, not wanting to follow all the rules that are set for you. And I think that, when you combine those two, that happens. It happens in the United States as often as it happens everywhere else in the world. But I think there's that sort of sliding scale between laziness, lack of accountability, and then maybe some cultural differences thrown in there. People are people. I firmly believe that people come into every situation wanting to do well, wanting to be well regarded. There's always going to be a percentage of people who are just going to, try to game the system or try to take advantage of a situation. But I think if you can instill the culture, and that's why we try to mold our culture of compliance with the local culture as much as we can, so that we can train in a way that they'll understand why we're doing things, so that they get that perspective of why we need to do things right the first time. And that's sort of how we approach things, how I've approached things.
So, I mean, we kind of talked a little bit around this, or you mentioned a couple times this, this topic of accountability, and this is really kind of the missing ingredient,
Totally.
The missing sort of component in most not just in compliance, I think in most cultures, right? We have these words on the wall, we have these codes of conduct, we have these processes and procedures, and this sort of gap persists. You know what I'm saying? What do you think is like driving that gap, and why do you think it's so hard for us to like close that gap consistently? Not just on our team, but I'm saying like on a macro sense, like what we're talking about kind of persists across all companies in my experience.
I think I think there's one, the main reason for me is people generally don't like uncomfortable conversations.
Right.
And I tend to look at, I look at everything backwards. Tiger Woods and Elton John, Tiger Woods played golf backwards. He stood on the green and looked into the fairway and figured out where his ball should be so that the ball could get to the right place on the Saturday pin placement. So he's standing on the green to figure that out, not on the tee box.
Yeah.
Elton John wrote the lyrics first and then put the music to the lyrics, which was, at the time, it's been repeated now, but at the time it was fairly backwards before people wrote melodies and they found the words that matched the melodies. He did everything backwards. If we do everything backwards from a compliance standpoint, someone needs to be set down and told that what you just did was wrong and you can't do it again. And have it not be done wrong again. That's the goal. There's always going to be mistakes. Nobody's going to be perfect. You're always going to have errors. But in order to avoid repeating them, you have to have uncomfortable conversations with people. Managers have to grab their people and say, that was wrong. Don't do it again. Those are the little things. But, again, culturally and process wise, it's having hard discussions with managers and directors and vice presidents and saying, what you're doing here is wrong. It can't sustain itself. You have to change. And if you can't change, you can't be here. And I think a lot of managers will come back, a lot of managers and directors will come back to me and going, well, I can't fire them for that. I'm like, no one's asking you to fire somebody for making a mistake. But what I'm asking you to do, what we're asking you to do, is hold them accountable, meaning they have to understand what they did was not proper. They have to understand how to do it properly, and also understand that we're going to be keeping an eye on you to make sure you do it, because repeatable events like that are going to harm the business. And those are tough conversations to have. It's tough to tell someone they're doing something wrong. It's tough to tell somebody they're not measuring up. But you can't let it go, and you can't fire everybody. And so you have to create this culture of accountability. I'm going to be accountable for what I do. I'm going to have to explain my actions. And so better for me to do it right the first time and to spend a little bit more effort making sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, so that our chief compliance officer isn't in my face on Monday morning, telling me we've got a major problem. And the higher up you get, it's funny that those conversations become much harder. I found team managers on the front line. Let's say you have a loan servicing operation. Team managers on the front line will be probably more inclined to give somebody an earful than an executive would be giving the head of operations in a country an earful, because that relationship might be longer. Losing that person would have more ramifications on the business. And so I think some people try to avoid those conversations as long as they can, or hope that it gets better. Hope that they turn it around. But it's you got to get in front of it. You got to get in their face, and you got to have those conversations sooner rather than later. I mean, accountability it's prompt, it's quick, and it's blunt. I mean, you have to be blunt, and you have to
You got to be clear.
you got to be clear.
Direct.
Absolutely, yeah.
The way you put that is kind of interesting because it's like as you go up the chain, so to speak, each of those sort of hierarchical relationships, where it's one tier, relative to the next tier above it, kind of there's like more at stake, right? Like there's kind of collectively more people below those individuals as opposed to that example you said on the front line where someone might feel more comfortable kind of giving somebody an earful. It's almost like it gets more important to have those accountability conversations as you go up. And yet sort of the circumstances, there's like these headwinds in place because of everything you said, the relationship's longer, the disruption to the business of this person getting, sapped and quitting because you hit him too hard or you were too blunt or whatever is a fear, I think, that ends up preventing us, leaders, whatever, from having those conversations. It's kind of in that it has this sort of ripple effect, as I'm thinking about an organization, which is just, the whole thing is so fascinating, when we're talking about a culture and a collection of people and like the extent to which we collectively sort of follow the rules or we, pursue the values that are in place. That's like that's an ever changing sort of shape, but it seems like the battleground is really in management. I'm going to kind of throw this out here and see, what you think about it. But like the battleground is in management because people don't quit companies. I mean, I kind of believe this. People don't quit companies. They quit their managers. I can't work for this person anymore. I don't respect this person. And so, the culture is really kind of disproportionately influenced by those managers and the extent to which they hold them to a standard. You were talking about growing up, the standard you were held to going to private school that your parents stretched to put you in was your job was to get good grades. And, you use the words, it's demanded of you. So I'm sure you wouldn't have said demanded if you just naturally did it. We say words like demanded because there were probably tough conversations along the way. How do we kind of address that sort of management? Let's just call it, just for shorthand, like this management failure to the extent that accountability gaps exist in our organizations and that's pervasive. And it kind of resides at that management level. That's kind of a failure in management sort of, writ large.
Absolutely. And it's the same fundamental problem. I go back to not wanting to have uncomfortable conversations with people, but the ripple effects are massive.
Right.
And on both sides. So I'll give an example. We had a couple companies ago, a very senior operator who was extremely poor when it came to client relations, never really found the appropriate alcohol intake level at conferences and meetings.
Right.
And really, this guy was hurting himself because his behavior was overshadowing all the good things he was doing. And people didn't want to be around him. And that affected the business. It affected sales. It affected his team. It also affected his boss because she didn't want to talk to him about it. It was uncomfortable for her. Well, I feel uncomfortable talking to somebody about their drinking. I said, well, I feel uncomfortable about losing 20% of our business. So, and the shareholders do too. So let's figure out how to have this conversation. And it never took place. And it just got worse and worse and worse to the point where, there had to be a drastic change one day. But, if you lose at that level, if you don't hold the managers accountable, you lose their team. You could lose their clients, their colleagues, and most of all, the respect of the VP, whoever's in charge of that group. Everybody else is going to think you're soft.
Totally.
And these are hard conversations. Again, these are hard conversations to have, but they're conversations that have to be had. You have to hold people accountable. And the way to do that is getting in their face and telling them it's better for me, it's better for the company, and it's better for you if you change. And, I think it also goes back to, I can't remember if it was Reagan or Bush, who used to have a saying, If someone was arguing with them in the Oval Office, I think it was George Bush would say, there's a reason I'm sitting on this side of the desk, and there's a reason you're sitting on that side of the desk. I'm the president, you're not. And those words can be tough to hear. There's a reason I'm running the department and a reason you haven't been selected to. I'm making the decisions when it comes to this. And, these aren't touchy-feely, flowery conversations to have with people. But, this isn't make-believe land. This isn't a project in a business school class. This is real life. There's jobs that depend on it. People need to feed their families because of your actions. And if they don't get that right, they might not have those opportunities anymore. So, they're tough conversations to have, but it's getting those, and the stakes get bigger as you get, as you go higher. And I also think the inability to act at that higher level is just, it's fatal. And if you can't get that, then, I think you're doomed.
Have you ever read or seen Moneyball?
Yes.
So, that guy, Billy Bean, that it's about, there's this thing that he said that really kind of, I've always remembered it. And he's like, I'm just having tough conversations every day. Mm-hmm. And if you think about like what a business is, there's so much non-compliance. And I'm not just talking about like violations of things, but there's non-compliance with respect to the way things are supposed to be done, the way a process is supposed to be conducted, the way, employee reviews are meant to be done, the way tough conversations themselves are supposed to be done. And all that volatility kind of creates a dead weight loss in an organization that actually kind of hits the bottom line in a negative way. Do you have like tips or best practices on like how you have these tough conversations? Is there a structure to them? The risk is that the tripwire is not close enough and you wait too long to have these conversations, because sometimes you can like rectify something. Sometimes you can get somebody back on track. And, like I've been guilty of this, of like waiting too long for all those reasons that like you kind of talked about. Oh, it's tough. I don't want to break this person. But then on the other side, it's like, well, the facts are the facts, and like the truth is the truth. And, at some level, I kind of owe it to this person because it's my responsibility, because it's on me at the end of the day. They're a reflection on me, whatever. I owe it to this person. I owe it to the stakeholders to have the conversation. So what's the kind of structure, like what's your kind of rules of thumb or heuristics around kind of setting those tripwires and approaching those actual sort of touch points that might be uncomfortable?
A good question. And the worst manager I ever had gave me the best piece of advice about managing. Honestly, honest to God, she was god awful. But she said to me one thing over the years that resonated with me. It was actually the day she took me out to lunch to congratulate me for getting moved over to her team. And then it went downhill from there.
Good start. Went downhill. All right.
But she said, if you just dictate to people and tell them what to do, they'll probably mostly reluctantly do it. But your relationships with those people will be terrible. If you give the people, alternatively, if you give people on your team a say in how that process, their behavior, their conduct, their actions, if you give them a say in how it gets better, they will walk behind you into a flaming building, no questions asked. And so when I have those tough conversations, they start with a positive and end with a positive. Talk to their managers, talk to the people around them, do a little background on them. I had one a couple weeks ago with a colleague, and I just said, look, you have incredible value. You get, your budget is always right on point. You're never late on the day-to-day, the basics. Your team likes you. People come to you for advice. I said, but there was just one aspect that he was just not performing. I go, but if you want to, and I asked him, what do you want to be? What do you want out of this? What do you want out of this job? What do you want out of this company? What do you want out of this career? And it's always, people always want to move up. People always want to have more responsibility, more money, more power, whatever the thing they're looking for. No one's, good, strategic, valuable people want more.
Right.
And telling them you'll never get it unless you fix this. And I can help you, but you have to decide you want to fix this. You have to decide if you want, because if you keep going down this path, go back to the person who couldn't hold their liquor in a conference setting or something like that. If you keep doing this, you're going to limit yourself. So initially, I think recognizing that they have a ton of value and they have a ton to offer the company, pointing out whatever's going on is going to keep that from happening. And then I think the last thing is you really have to get it across that it's not personal. I've had a couple of, really, madly successful people that I've worked for. And those people have been incredibly harsh and brutal at times. But right at the outset, it was said to me, this is not personal. I'm going to get in your face. I'm going to yell and scream sometimes. And you may not like what you hear on the other side of the microphone, but it's not personal. Those same people will call me when my kids graduate from high school. They'll call me when, a parent passes away or whatever happens in their life. They're still with you. But it's basically like, I'm going to be with you, but you've got to be with me. And here are my rules. Here are your rules. Let's try to, get it into the same place. But I think just dictating is not going to work. They have to want to do, and this is a little bit of the egotistical side that is a little awkward, but there's still something to it. You also have to tap into when people want to do well for you. Right. So I've had people tell me, Dan, I'm sick of you sort of being in my face. I want to do well so that you think I can do this job. Okay. It's more important that the company believes you're valuable than me. But, if that's what you can tap into, you can tap into that. But motivating them to do it right versus dictating to them to do it right, I think is the difference. And then the nicer you can be on the call, the more blunt you can be on the call. You give somebody a couple of compliments, you recognize.
Right.
And I think people also want to feel like they're not going to get fired, that they're not in jeopardy. What I tell my team all the time is, and I used to fear for my job all the time. I was very insecure. I'd worry if I did something wrong, I'd get fired. I just had that paranoia, probably made me a good lawyer. But I tell my team, you're fine with me until I tell you you're not fine with me. If those words come out of my mouth, we have a problem. I said, other than then, it's just coaching. It's motivating. It's getting them to, buy into the process, so to speak. But know that your job's always going to be here unless I tell you directly, okay, now we're at risk if this doesn't get better. And if I don't say those words, if I don't actually say that, then you're fine. And I think that's the trust you have to build with people, because that sets them at ease and they realize, okay, I'm not going to get fired for making a mistake. I'm not going to get fired if I slip a little bit, but I've got to turn it around when, my boss tells me to.
So, I mean, setting that stage at the front end of the relationship and kind of reinforcing that along the way really does kind of pave the way for you to have more of those direct conversations.
Absolutely, because I know myself.
Don't pull that work forward. Do you understand what I'm saying? They're not kind of seeing around the curve. They're just kind of taking it as it comes, and then they end up living in sort of a reactionary sort of management mode instead of that kind of instead of creating the circumstances for them to be more proactive in the management and in the accountability that is inevitably going to ensue.
I think you have to get them ready for what they're going to see when they're working on your team. And compliance the same way. The business has to understand what you're going to expect of it. And so whenever we have a new senior person come to the company, I always take the time to explain to them the culture here. That this is, Alorica's culture is be true, be bold, be relentless, and be connected. And so we tell everybody who starts, country managers, senior operators who come into the organization. We tell them right away, we're going to hold you accountable. We are going to be connected. I'm going to be in your face. I'm going to show up on Teams. I'm going to show up at your office. I'm going to show up in your country. We're going to be connected. I said, this company does it right. And that's every time. We don't cut corners. We do it. We do it right. And I said, if you can buy into that, I said, you will not have any problems from us. You will not have any audits from us. You will not need to worry about anything, because that's what the business has decided that the values of the company are going to be. And I said, I will be in your face if it doesn't go right. I will be in your face if you treat people poorly. I will be in your face if I hear there's poor treatment of staff or not following the rules when it comes to breaks or whatever that is, because we're not going to tolerate it. And I think that when the earlier you can do that, then it creates an expectation and it creates a trust level,
right? Where
then they can call you, and that's what you want. You want as a chief compliance officer, you want people to call you and be like, "Hey, we have a problem. Someone did this, or we didn't do that, or I didn't notice that this was happening, or I forgot to." Okay, let's work on it. Now, the next time you have a program that lights up, you're going to have a compliance officer sitting next to you, making sure this doesn't happen again. But I'd rather you call me and tell me in advance that, we could have a problem with a client, with a regulator, whatever, because that's what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to get on the phone with the client, or I'm going to get on the phone with the regulator and say, look, this happened and we fixed it. We just found, go to a regulator, like, we just found a problem with our letters. We weren't putting the payment coupon in the right place. Totally messed that up. We're going to retract 5,000 letters. We're going to have this thing fixed in 30 days and come back in 6 months and we'll show you that we're fine. Like, those relationships, are so strong because now they know there's somebody on the other side thinking like you. And that I have trust that those people are going to come to me, that there's people going to put compliance sort of at the top of their list of things to do. So, it goes back to those discussions, but you've got to have that trust, and you've got to have, again, you point out the positives, people will remember that, and they'll remember that you're not just going to yell at them, so that you want them to come to you. And so the last time I talked to Dan, that conversation went really well. He told me what I was doing right. He told me what I was doing wrong, and he helped me fix it. So this conversation is going to go the same way. I'm going to tell him what we did wrong. He's going to tell me how to fix it, and we're going to work together and fix it. And so that sort of culture, but you have to be connected to people. That's the biggest part of it. Being true and being bold and being relentless doesn't matter. You have to be connected. You have to embed yourself with them. That's why, we put our HR compliance people in the sites. We put our SWAT teams of compliance team personnel in the sites, in the call centers, with the managers, with the agents, in training classes.
Smart.
So that they can see it's part of everything we do. It's not just someone goes wrong, you press the red button, the compliance cop shows up and ejects you through the trap door. That's just not practical. You have to create a culture that it's embedded in everything we do, so that they're always thinking there's a compliance officer around, or there's someone listening or someone watching. And as we get into the automation, that's obviously going to be more true and more, more percentage of all these interactions are going to be monitored, and monitored more closely and in more detail. But just the thinking that compliance is embedded in what we do, I think gets those teams to be less of a problem and more compliant, more stringent with the rules.
Probably a small percentage of the entire workforce at any organization, it's like their first job, right? Most people in the company have worked somewhere else, and most of those other companies have compliance, or they have rules, they have codes of conduct and so forth. there is such an opportunity, kind of to your point, just the recency effect, right? Like the first impression that somebody has of you, they disproportionately remember that versus, some random conversation they have in the hallway. That I think the same thing is true for an organization. And I think there's a lot of clarity that kind of leads to more efficiency, of course, but also kind of more effectiveness in terms of the type of culture that ends up being generated by clarifying on the front end. This is how we do things. We really mean it. And this is embedded in everything. To your point, I love that. I love that sort of culture statement. I think you said it was be true, be bold, be relentless, and be connected. That kind of that's a bunch of different sort of aspects of what it takes to like really drive excellence. And if you're driving that sort of clarity on the front end, you're telling folks that like, if there's a problem, there's a line in the sand, and if you cross this line, we're going to be having a conversation about it. And oh, by the way, this compliance thing is not something that we're just paying lip service to, or this culture that we're trying to build is not something that just looks cool because there's four short sentences on a code of conduct. This is something that's actually going to animate how we interact with each other. It ends up really kind of setting the stage and sort of closing the gap between, the claims that the company's making and like how things are actually done.
Yeah, and it's funny, the be bold and be relentless part, that's the part that actually will end up creating some compliance issues, because people who act bold and act relentless, they're going to go.
They're going to push.
They're always plugged in. Their battery is always charged. As I think Kevin Love put it, their passion bucket is always full. They are going to, you're going to need a leash to keep these guys off the next project. And that inherently is going to bring with it speed and just those people are a force in the company. And if you can get them to be a force for compliance, as strong as they advocate for performance, as strong as they advocate for attendance. I mean, our business is, attendance, schedule adherence. The phone lines open at 8:00 Eastern for our client, which means at 8:00 Pacific or 8:00 PM in Manila, that team has to be ready to go. But if you've got a manager that's got them all ready to go at 8:00 and the stroke of a second, that's what you want. But you also want them to make sure that, leading up to that morning, that when their employee called in to say that their mother died, that you have some compassion and that you have some respect for our process, and that we have a 3-day grieving period in India, maybe, or whatever the rule is for people going home to be with their families, and understanding that we put that in place because it's the right thing to do, that we're being true to ourselves, we're being true to our people. And that's just as important as being relentless and making sure everybody's at work on time. So don't blow your stack when you've got 19 of 20 people on the phone that day and one person's at a funeral. You'll figure it out. You'll get on the phone. And then we say to them, this is what I would do. My contract manager has a family reunion next week. I'm going to spend 5 days reading healthcare contracts, because that's what you do as a boss.
Yeah, you jump in, you grab a bucket, you start bailing it out,
Exactly. And so the more they see that when all of those connect, so to speak, when all of those are sort of working in tandem,
those four things,
then your company, I mean, you're printing money at that point.
Right.
Because then you're just dealing with external factors and volume and business preferences and trends and things like that. But you've built a culture that is going to go at everything with the same vigor, no matter if it's schedule adherence or making sure the payment coupon is in the right part of the letter. It's all important. And because if something in one of those categories doesn't go right, you're not as efficient and you're not as good as the next guy. So that's the culture we try, and it really does resonate at the lower levels. And we have the thing also in the company, I stole this from I'll give him credit. His name is Jason Howerton. He owns ARS National Services. He was my boss for a couple of years. I definitely stole this from him, and I told him I stole it from him. He created this. He had this thing with me called gravity-free communication, and it was anybody in the company can talk to anybody else, no matter level, region, anything. And I'll pick up the phone and call an agent. I'll pick up the phone, and we have 100,000 people. I'll pick up the phone and call a training manager. I'll pick up the phone and call someone in recruiting and tell them they did something great. Tell them I recognize that something did wonderful or that they were recognized for something. But I'll also pick up the phone and tell them that I heard about something and this has to change. But that allows someone at an entry level or maybe a second or third level of the company to be talking to an executive. Right. And then, we try to end all those conversations with where do you live? Who's your favorite soccer team? Some sort of connection to what I like to do when I'm not working and what they might like to do when they're not working. And just to say, look, you're going to move up in this company. You're going to, you were an agent, then you were a TM, now you're a site manager. Sky's the limit. But you can't treat people like crap. Or I don't want to hear you yelling at a client in a meeting. Or I just saw your Teams transcript from your Teams call, and you can't use foul language in front of, certain people and it's just not acceptable. Right. So just having that gravity-free communication will benefit you the other way, because then when that site director is now running an LOB or they're running a country in 2 years and there's a massive problem, they will pick up the phone and they will call you. And they're like, I remember when we talked about so-and-so, you were fair with me. So I'm going to tell you, we just stepped in it here on something and I'm going to need your help to put out a fire. No problem. Right. So that connected part of the culture is the key. And the less connected you are, the more detached you become from people or certain situations, then it's a runaway train and, you can't get it back.
So this has been really great. I can't believe that we're right at time here. Just as a parting word, what do you think something that an ethics, compliance, legal leader could do today to drive more of this authentic accountability we've been talking about for the last hour into their organization and let that be this sort of catalyst for the excellence that we're all kind of striving toward?
I think make a list of, I did this a couple of days ago with an HR person who's got a lot of issues in her particular region, in her particular country. And she's like, there's just too much. She said to me, there's just too much. There's this. I said, go home and make a list of the top 3 things or people that are driving you up a wall and have one conversation next week. Have 2 conversations the second week. And the third week, take yourself to lunch. Don't try to, we use these flowery corporate terms that make me crazy, boiling the ocean. Right? You can't fix it all, but get yourself trained to attack one problem at a time and attack it in a way that you want to do it. You've always wanted to say to so-and-so, do this better or do this differently. You've always wanted to tell a vendor, I'm sick of not getting billed on time, right? Have that conversation. Have a tough conversation. And just don't worry about the consequences. Don't worry about the ramifications. If it doesn't go completely right, you'll get it. You'll do better the next 2. And if you get 2 out of every 3 right, then you're
in the Hall of Fame at that point.
You're in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I had the best piece of parenting advice I ever got was from a judge who has 2 girls who were same years apart as my 2 girls. They're a little older. He said, there's 3 things you need to worry about as your kids grow up: grades, behavior outside the house, and how they treat their mother. And he goes, if you can get 2 of those 3 positive every phase of their lives, he goes, your kids will be winners. And I go, did you ever get to all 3? And he goes, not a chance in hell. He said, he goes, for mine, they got good grades. They were really well behaved, but they didn't get along with their mother. And he goes, but you know what? There were times that they got along with their mother, and there were times that they got good grades. And then there were times that they got a speeding ticket or crashed a car. And he's like, you're never going to be perfect. But if you can have 2 of every 3 conversations or 3 of every 5 situations you're making better, then you're right. You're in the Hall of Fame for sure.
Yeah, it just starts stacking up. Man, this was awesome, Dan. I appreciate you coming on
Sure.
the Ethics Experts.
Hey, thanks for having me. I know we had a few fits and starts with scheduling, but I appreciate your patience. And this is the first podcast I've ever done, so this was a lot of fun. I appreciate. Yeah.
Well, you were a great guest. I feel like I learned a lot, and I got some encouragement to have some tough conversations that I probably need to have. And I love that 2 out of 3 rule. I mean, that's very freeing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're not going to hit every time, but you can get to that. And even 1 out of every 3 beats 0. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, appreciate you, man. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me. Have a good weekend.